Hi, and welcome to Dr. Archer's lectures. For the past few lectures, all the way up to this point in the course, we have been looking entirely at microeconomics. Microeconomics dealing with things that affect the individual and things that affect the individual firm. Today, we're starting a giant leap into the other side of economics, macroeconomics. Macroeconomics looks at the big picture, the things that affect the entire economy, and of course, things that affect the entire economy also have tremendous impact on individuals and individual firms from the outside. So today we're going to get started with gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is something that you hear a lot about during political seasons, which seems to be all the time anymore. Politicians talk about economic growth and they always put it in terms of GDP. But what is gross domestic product and how does it work? Let's look into it. Gross domestic product is all the money we make and all the money we spend. And they're one and the same. What? Yes, they're one and the same. Consider this. Every dollar I spend buying something from you becomes a dollar of income to you. So it's this giant circle that our money travels. Income to me is an expenditure from you. An expenditure from me is income to you. And the money goes around and around and around. So some definitions. Gross domestic product measures total income of everyone in the economy. Gross domestic product also measures total expenditure on the economy's output of goods and services. And that's because for the economy as a whole, income equals expenditures. Every dollar a buyer spends is a dollar of income for the seller. Let's look at that graphically for a minute because I know you're all fans of graphs by now. So consider the household. The household offers for sale factors of production. Remember factors of production from week 1? Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Households offer these things to firms, and firms buy them and use them to produce goods and services. When firms buy them, they pay those households. They pay wages for the labor, they pay rent for the land, and they pay profit for the capital. If you're invested in a company, you're going to get part of the profits. So now those wages, rent, and profit come back to the households as income. And what do we do with income? We spend it. It's the American way, right? So households spend buying the goods and services needed for daily life and many things that aren't needed for that matter. And they buy them from these firms that are producing these goods and services. So again, spending from goods and households becomes revenue for these firms. And the goods and services are sold and goods and services are bought. So households sell land and capital. Firms buy that land and capital to produce goods and services. They sell the goods and services back to households, and it goes around and around. Households receive payment from firms for the land, labor, and capital which they have offered for them. This is income to the household. The households use that income to buy the goods and services they need, which in turn creates revenue for the firms. The true definition of gross domestic product right here. This is a very important definition. Gross domestic product is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. several components to that definition, so let's break it down a little. First, gross domestic product measures the market value of all goods and services, not what you think it's worth, not what it was worth 10 years ago. It's today's market value. It's the market value, what you could sell it for today. Second, gross domestic product looks at final goods and services. Some intermediate goods and services are incorporated into the production process, but only final goods and services count toward gross domestic product. The goods that are counted in terms of gross domestic product, goods and services, have to have been produced. It can't be something that's just there. They have to have been produced within a country. In the United States, our gross domestic product is based on things that we produce within our borders. They may be consumed elsewhere. We do export goods and services, but they were produced here. And last, they have to be produced within a given period of time, usually a year. Here are some comparisons of gross domestic product for various countries, or a few countries around the world. You'll notice that China has the largest GDP at 21.29 trillion. And by the way, these are 2016 figures. The European Union comes in second. The European Union comes in second with 19.97 trillion. The US is third with 18.62 trillion. Then they really drop off. Mexico at 2.32 trillion. The United Kingdom at 2.785 trillion. Why would some countries have so much larger gross domestic product than others? Well, some of it has to do with the resources they have. If you have a large country with a lot of people and a lot of infrastructure, a lot of capital goods and manufacturing and things like that, their gross domestic product is going to be higher. If you have a small country with a small population that is perhaps not well developed in terms of capital goods, they will have a lower gross domestic product. But even taking that into consideration, consider this. The US has 5% of the world's population and 12% of the world's land. So rather minor from those two considerations. Yet this country produces 20% of the world's output. Why does our output so greatly outpace the resources that we have available? It has to do with the efficiency with which we use our resources. It has to do with innovation and entrepreneurship, both of which the United States is famous for, and also has to do with our educated workforce. So keeping in mind that GDP is spending is income, it's all one. There's 4 categories of spending. The first one is consumption, and that should be familiar to all of us who've ever spent a dollar. All the little things you buy every day, all the big things you buy from time to time, everything you buy for personal use, that's consumption. Investment, on the other hand, are the things that you buy to produce other things. These can be capital, machinery, and things like that. Anything that you buy to produce other things. The third category is government purchases. We all know that government spends money, and when they spend money, the government spending comes income to others. And so many businesses across the nation make a lot of money on government purchases. And then finally, you have net exports. Remember that in our definition of GDP, only goods that are produced in the United States count as part of our GDP GDP. So we take our exports, the things we make here that are consumed elsewhere, and then we deduct our imports, things that were produced elsewhere but that were consumed here. And the difference between exports minus imports is net exports, and that's the fourth component of GDP. When you write it out, it looks like this. Y stands for GDP equals consumption, C, investment, I, government spending, G, and net exports, NX. Now let's think about that definition again for a minute. Our definition of GDP says that GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country within a given period of time. It looks to me like there could be two ways that GDP could increase. First, production could increase. We could simply be producing more. Maybe we have a few more resources this year, or maybe we just made more efficient use of the resources that we have. Either way, we could be producing more. But the second way that GDP could increase would be simply through inflation. If it's the market value of all goods and services, if the market value went up, even though the production of goods and services remained the same, then GDP would increase. That's a bit of a distortion, and it's a distortion that we're going to want to strip out because we really just want to look at changes in production. And so that's why we've created real GDP versus nominal GDP, two categories here. The first, nominal GDP, is just the values output using current prices. It's current market price times current quantity. That's it. It is not adjusted for inflation. Real GDP, on the other hand, uses value output based on the prices in a base year. So we use the price in the base year times the quantity in the current year. So we can tell that we've produced more, whether or not we've produced more, and it's not distorted by changes in prices. And this is corrected for inflation. So let's look at an example. I think it'll make more sense when you start looking at it. Here we have pizza and latte consumption for the years 2011, 2012, and 2013. So first, let's calculate just the nominal GDP. Nominal GDP, as you'll remember from the previous slide, is simply the price times the quantity. Price times quantity, that's it. So for 2011, pizzas sold for $10 each, and we produced 400 of them. And lattes sold for $2 each, and we produced 1,000 of them. So our total GDP was $4,000 plus $2,000, or $6,000. Let's try 2012. 2012, the price of pizza went up to $11, and the quantity increased to $500, or 500. So we have $11 times 500 for pizza. And then on the latte side, the price went up to $2.50, but the quantity increased to 1,100. So you have $2.50 times 1,100. So you have 8,250. So GDP increased, but that increase is a mix, a muddled mix of increases in prices and actual increased production. And it's hard to sort out which is dominant here. Let's look finally at 2013. One more look. The price of pizza in 2013 went up again to $12, and the quantity that we produced increased to 600. On the latte side, the price of lattes increased to $3, but the quantity produced increased to 1,200. So our GDP went up from $8,250 in 2012 to $10,800 in 2013. Again, that increase is a mix of the impact of price and the impact of actual increased production. So we can look at this and look at the percentage change and see that it's 37.5% increase from 11 to 12 and 30.9% increase from 12 to 13. Both of those are pretty large increases. So what if we stripped out the effect of that price increase for those goods? What if we calculated this based on real GDP? Real GDP, you will remember, is based on prices in the base year, which we're told right here is going to be 2011, but the quantity of the current year. So for the first year, 2011 is the base year, so we use the $10 price for pizza. 2011 is the year we're calculating, so we use the 400 quantity. Likewise, $2 is the base year price for lattes. We're calculating 2011, so we use 1,000 as the quantity, and we get a real GDP of $6,000, which is exactly the same as nominal GDP that we got in the previous slide. Why? Because 2011 is the base year, so you wouldn't see a difference. But wait till you see what happens in 2012. In 2012, we're going to use the base year price for pizza, $10, but we're going to multiply it by the 2012 quantity for pizza, 500. So we have a total of $5,000 in pizzas. And we're going to do the same thing on the latte side. We use the base year price for lattes, $2, but the 2012 quantity, 1,100. Add those together and you get 7,200. We're correcting for inflation. Since we're using the base year price, inflation doesn't come into the picture here at all. It's all about increases in quantity. So let's look at 2013. Same thing. You go back to the base year price for pizza at $10 and multiply that by the 2013 quantity, 600. On the latte side, same thing. The base year price for latte, $2, times the 2013 quantity, 1,200. Add those together and you get 8,400. These numbers are significantly lower than the nominal GDP, but look when we look at percentage change. Only a 20% increase from 2011 to 2012. That was like a 37% increase before. Only a 16.7% increase from 2012 to 2013. These increases represent the actual increase in production. That's how many more pizzas and lattes we produced without regard for the price. The GDP deflator is a measure of the overall price levels. And the way we find the GDP deflator is we take the nominal GDP, divide it by the real GDP, and multiply by 100. Why would we do that, you ask? When you compare the percentage increase in the GDP inflator from one year to the next, it tells you the inflation rate. So let's try it out with our example problem. Here we are with the nominal and GDP and real GDPs that we calculated previously. So for the first one, it's nominal GDP 6,000 divided by real GDP 6,000. 6,000 divided by 6,000 is 1. Multiply by 100. 1 times 100 is 100. So you get a GDP inflator of 100. For the second year, it's a little more complicated. Nominal GDP 8,250 divided by real GDP 7,200, and then multiply by 100, and you get 114.6. Third year, nominal GDP 10,800 divided by 8,400 gives you 1.286 times 100 gives you 128.6. That's your GDP deflator for each of those years, but there's one more step to be able to figure the inflation rate. The inflation rate now is the percentage change in the GDP deflator from one year to the next. So looking at 2011 versus 2012, there's a 14.6% increase in the GDP deflator. Considering 2012 to 2013, there's a 12.2% increase in the GDP deflator. And that's it today for Dr. Archer's lecture. Be sure and come see me tomorrow when we're going to talk about inflation and how that all works. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks for stopping by.